She showed up in white, holding a bouquet like she owned my day. She posed for photos, pretending she still had a place in his life. I didn't flinch, because in my purse, I carried the one thing that would end her performance in front of everyone she wanted to impress.
My name is Renee Caldwell, and this is the story of how I learned that silence has a price and why I chose to break mine at the altar. I was 38 when I agreed to marry Devin Cole, and even now, when I look back on those early months, I can almost feel the softness of that illusion I wrapped myself in. I wanted to believe in peace so badly that I closed my eyes to anything that cracked the fantasy. I had spent most of my adult life learning how to stand on my own, a childhood marked by a distant father who vanished once the custody checks stopped coming, early jobs where I had to work twice as hard just to be taken seriously, and a decade-long climb in a corporate office where politeness often masked disrespect. By the time Devin entered my life, I had learned to swallow friction, to smooth over tension, to choose silence when speaking up meant starting a battle I didn't have the energy for. I told myself that letting things slide made me mature. I didn't realize that it also made me vulnerable to people who would take advantage of that quiet. Devin was different from the men I had dated in my 20s. He had the calm voice, the steady job, the confident smile that hinted he had lived enough life to know what mattered. He admired my independence, or so he claimed. "You're the most grounded woman I've ever met, Renee," he told me one evening as we shared takeout on my balcony. "You make the noise in my life make sense." I wanted to believe that. I wanted something stable, something grown. I didn't mind that he had a past. At our age, who didn't? What I didn't see was how deeply that past still clung to him, quietly waiting for a moment to reassert itself. His family welcomed me in a way I hadn't experienced in years. His mother, Denise, hugged me each time she saw me, squeezing my shoulders with a warmth that felt genuine. His aunties insisted I sit next to them at dinners, telling me stories about Devin's childhood, laughing, filling my plate before I could protest. His cousins teased him about finally choosing a real woman. For a while, I let myself relax into that circle, believing I was being embraced for who I was. But even in the glow of that acceptance, tiny fractures appeared, the kind you notice but convince yourself not to worry about. The first time someone mentioned Simone, his ex, it was so casual I almost ignored it. His cousin Keisha made a face when the name came up and muttered, "That woman always did think she was the main character." Everyone laughed, but Devin quickly changed the subject. When I later asked him who she was, he brushed it off with, "Just an ex who didn't know when to let go. Ancient history." His tone was dismissive, almost irritated, and I didn't push. I wasn't the jealous type, and I didn't want to become one. Still, the way the family tensed ever so slightly when her name slipped out didn't match his version of ancient history. There were other moments, too, subtle but sharp enough to leave marks. Once, early on, we arrived at a family gathering, and Denise accidentally called me Sim before catching herself. Her smile stretched too wide afterward, her voice overly bright. "Sorry, baby, my mouth moves faster than my brain," she said, patting my arm. But the moment stuck with me, blooming into quiet doubt on the ride home. Devin brushed it off with a laugh. "She mixes up names all the time. Don't overthink it." I nodded, telling myself not to make a mountain out of a syllable. Another afternoon, while helping set up for Devin's nephew's birthday, his Aunt Rochelle joked, "Let's hope this one doesn't run off crying like the last fiancé-to-be." She winked at me, but the heaviness behind it didn't feel like a joke. When I asked Devin later, he sighed, looking annoyed. "My family exaggerates everything. Simone wasn't even at that party." He avoided my eyes when he said it, and I pushed the discomfort down. After all, families gossip, and I didn't want to be the woman who picked fights over shadows. But perhaps the biggest red flag appeared months before the wedding, disguised as tenderness. We were at a dinner with his family when Denise made an insinuating comment about how some women only look confident until real pressure hits. She didn't name anyone, but her eyes flickered briefly toward me. Before I could respond, Devin chuckled and said, "Mom, leave Renee alone. She's not like the others." The table laughed, yet something in his tone made me shrink inside myself. The others. The phrase rang like a bell in my mind. I realized then that he still measured me against women I'd never met, women who had shaped him in ways I had yet to understand. I tried to shake it off. I reminded myself that relationships required grace, that blending into a family took time. But late at night, when Devin slept beside me, I would lie awake replaying those moments. Why did his family speak about Simone with such charged energy? Why did Devin get defensive whenever her name surfaced? Why did I feel, deep in my bones, like there was a ghost in the room every time I looked at our future? Once, during a quiet dinner at home, I decided to press a little. "Devin," I asked gently, "did things end badly with her?" He didn't look up from his plate. "I told you, she was dramatic. I'm not giving her any more of my time." Then he changed the subject. His tone wasn't angry, but final. I took a sip of wine to hide the sting of frustration. I wanted honesty, not a wall. Still, I kept going, telling myself that not every relationship could be dissected under a microscope. I found solace in planning our future, in choosing the venue, discussing colors, imagining my name linked with his. I let myself fall into hope, but underneath the lace and promises, the uneasiness grew roots. The last sign, the one I wish I hadn't ignored, came during a family barbecue. I had brought a dessert I spent the whole morning preparing, and as soon as I placed it on the table, Denise whispered to Rochelle, "Simone made the same thing once. Hers looked more polished." She probably thought I didn't hear. I smiled through it, pretending my chest didn't tighten. Devin walked by and ruffled my shoulder affectionately, completely oblivious. And that's when it clicked. Not fully, not consciously, but enough to haunt me later. Devin wasn't careless, he wasn't malicious, but he was comfortable letting me absorb small wounds if it avoided confrontation. He had spent so much of his life smoothing over Simone's storms that my silence felt like a blessing to him. He relied on it, counted on it. I didn't know then that silence, my supposed strength, would become the very thing that allowed the humiliation to bloom unchecked. I didn't know the past I tried so hard to ignore would come crashing into my present, wearing white, clutching roses, smiling like she still belonged. But I felt it. On some instinctive, deep, womanly level, I felt the storm building. The week before the rehearsal, the tension in me was like a quiet hum I couldn't turn off. But I kept moving through the checklist like a woman determined to earn her own happiness. Final dress fitting, menu confirmation, seating arrangements. Devin seemed relaxed, almost relieved that the big day was close. "We're almost there, baby," he kept saying, kissing my forehead, squeezing my hand. I tried to let his calm soak into me, but every now and then I would catch a flicker in his eyes when someone mentioned exes or old stories, and my chest would tighten. One night, while we were going over the guest list, I ran my finger down the page and asked lightly, "So, none of your past is going to surprise me by showing up, right?" Devin chuckled and waved it off. "Renee, nobody wants drama. People know their place." He said it with such easy confidence that I almost believed him. The first level of humiliation came quietly, wrapped in something that almost looked like concern. On the afternoon of the rehearsal, I arrived at the venue early with Denise and Aunt Rochelle to make sure everything was as we wanted. The hall was beautiful, all soft lights and pale flowers, the aisle stretching out like a promise. I was adjusting a centerpiece when I heard Denise's voice behind me. "You sure you're not too overwhelmed, baby?" she asked. "Some women just aren't built for this kind of attention." I turned, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. Just want it to be right." Rochelle gave Denise a look, but Denise went on, lowering her voice just enough that it still hit me. "Simone, she used to crumble when things got real big. Ran off crying once, remember?" She chuckled at the memory, almost fond. "I just hope you're stronger than that." It was a small cut, but it landed deep because beneath her words was a comparison I had never asked for. I swallowed and said, "I'm not her." My voice came out calmer than I felt. Denise patted my shoulder like I was a nervous child. "I know, baby. I'm just saying, big days bring out the truth in people." When she walked away, I stood alone by the flowers, staring at my reflection in a nearby mirror. My face looked composed, but my thoughts were anything but. Why did Simone's name have to be here at all? Why did I feel like I was auditioning for a role someone else had already played and lost? I took a slow breath, straightened my back, and reminded myself, this is my day. My life. My turn. By the time guests began arriving for the rehearsal, I had pushed the conversation with Denise to the back of my mind and glued on my best smile. My bridesmaids fussed over my dress, the coordinator walked us through the ceremony order, and Devin stood at the front with his groomsmen, looking proud and easy. I caught his eye and he mouthed, "You look perfect." For a brief moment, the hum of doubt faded under a wave of warmth. The music started, and I took my first slow steps down the aisle, imagining the real thing, the room full, everyone watching with love in their faces. I was halfway down when the doors at the back opened again with a soft thud that somehow sounded like a warning. Heads turned in unison. The coordinator frowned, clearly not expecting anyone else. I followed everyone's gaze and saw her, Simone. She walked in as if the rehearsal were her entrance cue. The dress she wore wasn't just white. It was a deliberate, polished bridal white, hugging her curves with shimmering detail. Her heels clicked against the floor in a rhythm that felt designed to draw attention, and in her hands she carried a bouquet of white roses, full and fresh, like someone had just handed it to her from the florist's box. The room inhaled sharply, a collective gasp masked by nervous laughter. One of Devon's cousins muttered, "You've got to be kidding," under her breath, but her phone was already in her hand, camera half raised. Simone paused for effect, scanning the room, then let a slow smile spread across her face. "Hope I'm not too late," she said, her voice ringing out smooth and confident. "I heard my favorite couple was practicing for the big day." She walked forward, bouquet swaying, every step a statement. I felt my throat tighten, my fingers clenching around the small rehearsal program I held. My first instinct was to look at Devon. He had gone pale, eyes wide for a split second before he smoothed his features into something like a strained smile. "Simone," he said, his voice flat. "Didn't know you were coming," she laughed softly. "Well, you know me. I always show up where the big moments are." She shifted her gaze to me, her eyes flicking up and down, taking in my simple rehearsal dress. "Renee," she said with a sweetness that didn't reach her gaze, "you look cute." The word landed like a slap, small and sugary, but designed to sting. Guests shifted uncomfortably, not sure whether to watch or look away. Denise stepped forward, forcing a bright smile. "Simone, you made it," she said, hugging her like an old friend. "We weren't sure if you'd come." I watched them embrace, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. Had they invited her? Had she just shown up? Either way, there she was, wrapped in white, standing on the threshold of my future, like it was still a door she had the right to walk through. I felt suddenly exposed, like the room had shrunk and every eye was measuring my reaction. The second level of humiliation unfolded slowly, like a performance she had rehearsed. As the rehearsal continued, Simone didn't slip quietly into a back row. She floated among the guests, hugging cousins, laughing with aunties, posing for photos. Whenever someone raised a phone, she turned slightly, angling her body so the bouquet and the white dress were fully in frame. In one terrible moment, I heard someone say, "You two look just like a bride and groom," as she stood laughing beside Devon's brother. My stomach twisted. I caught snippets of her words as she passed near me. "I'm just so happy for them," she said loudly. "Devon and we've got so much history. It's beautiful to see him finally make it here." The coordinator tried to restart the run-through, but the energy was off. I walked down the aisle again, aware of Simone's gaze tracking my every step. When we reached the part where Devon and I were supposed to practice our vows, she let out a soft, theatrical sigh. "Ah," she said, pressing a hand against her chest. "I remember when we talked about vows." My head snapped toward her, Devon's jaw clenched. He glared at her, but said nothing. Nothing. The silence roared in my ears, louder than any shout. Inside, something in me cracked. I heard my own voice whispering in my mind, "Say something. Stop this. Walk over there and ask her to leave." But right behind that thought came another, colder one. If I explode now, I'll be the dramatic one. I'll be the story. I'll be exactly what they expect. I felt every year of my life pressing on my shoulders, every meeting where I had smiled through disrespect, every moment when I chose peace over confrontation to protect myself. I stood there in the middle of that aisle, heart pounding, and realized the rehearsal had become a test. Was I going to play the role they had already written for me, or write my own? When the coordinator finally called for a break, my bridesmaid Tasha slipped to my side, her eyes burning. "You okay?" she murmured. My smile felt brittle. "I'm fine," I lied. She glanced at Simone. "You want me to say something?" For a second, I imagined Tasha marching over, calling Simone out, forcing Devon's family to choose a side. But the image of that chaos swirling around my almost wedding made my chest seize. "No," I said quietly. "Not here, not like this." Tasha searched my face, then nodded slowly. "You're stronger than me," she whispered. I wasn't sure if that was true. Maybe I was just more used to swallowing fire. Later, as the rehearsal wound down, Simone approached me directly. Up close, her perfume was too sweet, cloying. She smiled, tilting her head. "Renee, I just wanted to congratulate you properly," she said. "It takes a special woman to step into Devon's life. He's complicated." I met her eyes and said nothing. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping. "I just hope he's really ready to leave certain things behind." The implication hung in the air between us like smoke. My pulse thundered in my ears. "I hope so too," I replied, keeping my tone level. "Because I don't share." For a moment, surprise flickered across her face, and then she smirked, amused. "We'll see," she murmured before drifting away. On the drive home, Devon held the steering wheel a little too tightly, the muscles in his forearms tense. I stared out the window, watching the city lights smear into streaks. "Finally," I said, "you knew she might come, didn't you?" He exhaled sharply. "Renee, can we not do this tonight? She's nothing. She likes attention. If we ignore her, she'll disappear." I turned to him, incredulous. "She showed up in a white dress, Devon, with a bouquet at our rehearsal. Your mother hugged her. Your family let her pose like she belongs there." His jaw shifted. "My mother is too nice. And Simone, that's just who she is. Don't give her the satisfaction of reacting." The words lodged in my chest like shards. Don't react. Don't speak. Don't disrupt. Just endure. I looked back out the window and felt tears sting my eyes, but I blinked them away before they could fall. In that moment, sitting in the quiet hum of the car, I realized something brutal. Devon wasn't going to protect me from his past. He was going to ask me to live alongside it, to make room for it, to pretend it didn't bother me while it strutted through my milestones in white. The humiliation at the rehearsal wasn't just about Simone's dress or the bouquet. It was about everyone in that room silently betting that I would swallow it, that I would keep the peace at my own expense. That night, lying awake next to a man who slept easily after telling me not to give her the satisfaction, I understood that something inside me had shifted. My silence, once a shield, had become a cage. And while I still didn't know exactly how, I knew this: there would be a reckoning. Not with screaming or scenes, but with something far more precise. The night after the rehearsal, the house felt wrong, like a stage after the audience had left and the props were still scattered everywhere. Devin fell asleep quickly, the way men do when they've decided a conversation is over, his breathing settling into a slow rhythm beside me. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of Simone's entrance. The white dress. The bouquet. The way his mother's arms wrapped around her like she'd been waiting for her to arrive. My chest ached like someone had been pressing a thumb into a bruise all evening. I turned my head and looked at Devin's face in the dim light. He looked so peaceful, so sure that his ignore her and she'll disappear strategy was enough. I realized then that he didn't understand what it costs a woman to keep swallowing disrespect. Or maybe he understood and just preferred the comfort of my silence. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, a soft vibration that broke the quiet. I watched it light up, the screen briefly illuminating his jawline. For a moment, I told myself to look away, to be mature, to respect his privacy. Then I saw the name, Simone. The preview of the message hovered beneath it like a taunt. My heart started pounding, not because I didn't trust Devin, but because the past had just stepped into my bedroom, uninvited again. I reached for the phone slowly, moving like someone trying not to wake a sleeping animal. He didn't stir. The screen unlocked with his thumbprint already saved to memory, and in that small, traitorous act, my life split into a before and after. The thread was long. I scrolled up, eyes scanning, barely breathing. There were jokes, little comments about old memories, inside references I didn't understand. Then the tone shifted. "I miss us," she'd written. "You know nobody understands you the way I do." A few lines later, "She looks like a filler between chapters, Devin. You'll come back when you're done playing house." I felt my stomach drop, my hand trembling slightly as I kept going. It wasn't just Simone talking into a void. Devin had replied. "Don't start," he'd written. You know this isn't helpful, but he hadn't said no. He hadn't said, "I love Renee, leave me alone." He had kept answering, feeding the connection like a man who enjoyed the attention even as he pretended to reject it. And then I found the line that made everything click into focus. "Jordan would lose his mind if he knew I still talk to you," she'd written. "He thinks I'm over you, but you and I both know real things don't just end." There it was, the boyfriend Devin had mentioned vaguely once, the one he'd claimed was old news. Jordan. A man out there somewhere building a life with a woman who was using my fiancé as an emotional backup generator. "He doesn't need to know everything," Devin had replied. "No point starting drama." The words burned. No point starting drama. My pain, my humiliation, my wedding. All becoming acceptable collateral in his war against drama. I heard my own voice in my head, low and cold. So this is what my silence has bought me. I forwarded the entire thread to my email, my fingers suddenly steady. If Devin could keep receipts for his comfort, I could keep receipts for my survival. When the message sent notification flashed, I locked the phone and set it back where it had been. I lay there for a long time, heart pounding, listening to him breathe. A part of me still wanted to shake him awake, shove the screen in his face, demand, explain this. But another part, the part that had spent a lifetime being told not to overreact, knew how that conversation would go. He'd minimize. He'd twist. He'd ask why I was going through his phone instead of why his ex thought she could stand in white at my rehearsal and still text him like she owned him. By morning, the shock had hardened into something sharper. I went to work on autopilot, clutching my bag like it was holding something more precious than makeup and keys. As soon as I got to my office, I closed the door, pulled up my email, and opened the forwarded thread. The words looked even uglier on a larger screen, like they no longer fit inside the excuses I'd been making for him. I hit print and listened to the machine hum to life, spitting out page after page of the truth they both thought would stay hidden. When I gathered the warm papers into my hands, I didn't feel powerful. I felt strangely calm, like I had finally been handed the missing piece of a puzzle I'd been trying to pretend didn't exist. At lunch, I met Tasha at a small place near my office. She took one look at my face and set down her drink without touching it. "Okay," she said quietly. "Tell me." I slid the folded pages across the table. She read in silence, her expression shifting. First disbelief, then anger, then something like grim satisfaction. "You know," she said eventually, "I kept telling myself I was being paranoid at the rehearsal, that maybe Simone showing up in white was just some sick joke. But this?" She tapped the papers. "This is a strategy. She's not just messy. She's invested in you doubting yourself." I stirred my drink without tasting it. "Devin knew she was still talking like this," I said. "Maybe he didn't like it, but he didn't stop it either." Tasha leaned in. "So what do you want to do, Renee?" Her voice softened. "Do you still want to marry him?" The question hung between us, heavier than the pages on the table. Did I want to marry a man who thought my peace was more valuable than my dignity? In that moment, my answer was clear. I wanted the truth. I wanted everyone in that room, his mother, his cousins, Simone, even Devin, to see exactly what their little performance had cost me. "I want her to feel what I felt," I said quietly. "Not with screams and scenes. I want her to see herself the way I had to see myself in that aisle." Tasha raised an eyebrow. "So how do we do that?" That was when the idea that had been forming at the back of my mind stepped into the light. "She has a boyfriend," I said. "Jordan. He thinks she's over Devin. She thinks he'll never find out otherwise, so I'm going to invite him to the truth." That afternoon, between emails and meetings, I tracked down Jordan using the crumbs Simone had left in the thread. A tagged photo, an old comment, a handle that matched a name. It didn't take long to find his profile, smiling, unsuspecting, arm around Simone in picture after picture, both of them projecting that polished, curated happiness. My chest tightened again, this time with a strange, reluctant empathy. He looked like a man who believed his life was stable. I clicked message and stared at the empty box for a long time. Finally, I typed, "Hi, Jordan. I know you don't know me. My name is Renee. I think there's something you deserve to see before my wedding this weekend. I attached the screenshots, my hands only shaking once, and hit send. The risk came quicker than I expected. That evening, as I was sliding the printed pages into a simple, unmarked envelope at home, Devin walked into the room earlier than usual. I jolted, nearly dropping the envelope. He frowned. "What's that?" he asked. I forced my fingers to relax and lifted the first page slightly, showing only the blank back. "Seating charts," I lied. "The coordinator messed up a few rows. I'm trying to fix it before it becomes a problem." He groaned and came closer. "Babe, you're stressing too much. Let it go. If someone ends up in the wrong seat, they'll live." He reached for the envelope, and my heartbeat exploded in my ears. But instead of grabbing it, he wrapped his arms around my waist from behind and kissed my neck. "Come on," he murmured. "Let's think about something else for a while." I smiled tightly, slipping the envelope into my bag with one hand while patting his arm with the other. "I will," I said. "Soon." Later that night, while he showered, I checked my messages again. A response from Jordan was waiting. "Is this a joke?" he'd written first. A few minutes later, another message. "When were these sent?" I replied with the dates and times, my throat tight. There was a long pause, and then, "Thank you for sending this. I had a feeling something was off lately. You said your wedding? When is it?" I told him the date and the time, and after another stretch of silence, he wrote, "I'll be there." No emojis, no extra words. Just a promise. I set the phone down and closed my eyes, feeling a strange mixture of guilt and vindication. Simone wanted to be the star of my rehearsal. She was about to meet someone's reality at my wedding. The days leading up to the ceremony felt surreal. On the surface, everything was normal. Final confirmations, texts from excited friends, last-minute questions from the planner. Devin moved through it all with the easy stride of a man who believed everything was under control. Every time he kissed my forehead and said, "I can't wait to call you my wife," something inside me twisted. I wasn't planning to stand at the altar and say "I do" to a fantasy, but I also wasn't ready to detonate the relationship in private behind closed doors where everyone would claim I'd imagined the wrongs done to me. No. If this was going to end, it was going to end in the same room where my humiliation had been allowed to breathe. The night before the wedding, Aunt Lorraine, the quiet one in Devin's family, who mostly watched more than she spoke, pulled me aside. We were in Denise's kitchen, surrounded by trays of food and plastic-covered dresses, when she touched my elbow gently. "You sure you're all right, baby?" she asked. Her eyes were steady, searching. "You've been distant." For a moment, I considered confessing everything to her, letting the weight spill out of me. But then I remembered how easily the rest of his family had hugged Simone, how quickly they had minimized my discomfort. I couldn't risk my plan getting blunted by their desire for a seamless story. "I'm just tired," I said softly. "It's been a long week." Lorraine studied me for a second longer than was comfortable, then nodded slowly. "Well, whatever it is, remember this. The ceremony might be about all of them, but the promise is about you. Don't forget yourself in the process." Her words landed in a place I didn't yet know how to name. That night, alone in my own apartment for the last time as an unmarried woman, I laid the envelope on my vanity and stared at it. Inside were the printed messages: Simone's contempt, Devon's cowardice, the truth no one had offered me willingly. I ran my fingers over the flap and felt my heartbeat steady. I thought about every time I had chosen silence, when my boss had taken credit for my work and I'd smiled it away, when Devon's mother had compared me to Simone like we were contestants, when Simone had walked into my rehearsal in white and I had kept my voice level. Silence had kept me safe, yes. Safe and slowly erasing myself. Tomorrow, I decided, my voice would return. I slipped the envelope into the small purse I'd chosen for the ceremony, the same one that would hang from my wrist as I walked down the aisle. I pictured Simone arriving again in some version of bridal white, expecting to repeat the same performance. I pictured Devon believing he could get through the day by simply not looking directly at the damage he'd allowed. And then I pictured Jordan at the back of the room, holding the other half of the truth I had sent him. Simone wanted an audience. She was about to get one. The morning of the wedding felt strangely quiet, like the world was holding its breath. My stylist chatted softly as she pinned my hair, my makeup artist humming along to some song on the radio. But underneath all of it, there was a hum in my chest that felt like standing near a power line. I watched myself in the mirror, the dress, the veil, the carefully painted calm on my face, and thought, this is what people see when they say, she's got it all together. They never see the folder of screenshots in her bag. They never see the way her jaw aches from clenching through other people's disrespect. When my phone buzzed on the counter, I glanced at the screen. A simple text from Tasha. I've got you. Whatever happens, I'm with you. I typed back, thank you, and added, remember the envelope. She replied with a single thumbs up, and it was enough. At the venue, everything was exactly as we had planned. Rows of chairs dressed in white, soft flowers lining the aisle, the air full of perfume and anticipation. People moved through the space in little currents of conversation and laughter, pausing to look at me as I arrived. You look stunning, Renee, one of Devon's cousins said, eyes wide. Like royalty. I smiled and thanked her, feeling like I was watching myself from a distance. Denise approached, eyes glossy, clutching a tissue. My baby is really doing it, she whispered, pulling me into a careful hug. Her perfume wrapped around me, familiar and suffocating. You ready? She asked. I held her gaze and said, I'm ready to be honest. She chuckled, not understanding. That's all that matters, baby. Aunt Lorraine found me a few minutes later, just before the coordinator announced we should line up. She took my hands, her voice low. Whatever you decide in there, make sure it's yours, she said. There was something in her eyes, a knowing, a quiet question, but she didn't push. I searched her face for judgment and found none, just a steady calm that steadied me in return. Thank you, I whispered, for seeing me. She squeezed my fingers once and stepped back to her seat, leaving me with my own reflection in a small hallway mirror. The purse with the envelope hung from my wrist, its weight disproportionate to its size. This is my voice, I thought. Not my anger, not my drama, my voice. The coordinator hurried in, bright and a bit flustered. Everyone in position, she chirped. Simone just arrived, so we're good to go. The name hit me like a slap, but I kept my face neutral. She's here? I asked, pretending surprise. The coordinator nodded, oblivious. Yes, she's in the back with some of Devon's family. Girl is dressed like she's going to the Grammys. My stomach tightened, but instead of dread, I felt an eerie calm wash over me. Of course she was here. This was the stage she thought she'd stolen. She just didn't know the script had changed. From the small gap near the doorway, I saw her enter the main hall once the guests had mostly taken their seats. She was wearing white again, but this time the dress was even more dramatic. A mermaid silhouette with sequins catching the light, a neckline designed to be remembered. She walked slowly down the side aisle, not down the center, but in a way that still demanded attention. People turned, whispered. A few raised their phones. Simone smiled, the bouquet in her hands just as excessive as the day before, lush and perfect. She greeted Denise with another hug, kissed Rochelle on the cheek, posed for a quick picture with a group of cousins. She never looked toward the entrance where I stood, but I knew she assumed I was watching. What she didn't see, at least not at first, was the man standing near the back, slightly apart from the rest. Jordan. He wore a dark suit, his expression carefully controlled, his eyes tracking Simone's every move. I watched him from my hiding place, noting the tightness around his mouth, the way his jaw worked when she laughed, like nothing in the world could touch her. Our eyes met briefly across the distance when he glanced toward the front. He didn't nod or smile, but there was recognition in his gaze, a shared understanding of what was about to crack open. The music began, the soft strains filling the room, signaling the start of the procession. My bridesmaids went first, gliding down the aisle in their dresses, smiling at guests, unaware of the storm currents beneath the calm surface. Tasha went last among them, and as she passed me, she gave the smallest tilt of her head toward my purse, a silent reminder. Devon took his place at the front, beside the officiant, looking handsome, composed, hopeful. If he was worried about Simone, he hid it well. For a brief moment, my heart clenched. This could have been an ordinary day. This could have been simple. Then I remembered the messages, her calling me filler, his refusal to choose a side, and the softness inside me turned to iron. When it was my turn, the doors opened wide and the room rose to its feet. I stepped into the light, my dress trailing behind me, veil framing my face. Guests smiled, some with tears already in their eyes. I let my gaze sweep the room, seeing everything in sharp detail. Denise blotting her cheeks with a tissue, Rochelle clutching her phone, Aunt Lorraine watching me like someone reading a crucial line in a book. Jordan standing near the back, hands folded, eyes fixed on Simone, who was stealing glances between me and Devon with a strange, unreadable expression. I walked slowly, each step deliberate, feeling the purse at my side, the envelope inside brushing my fingers. At the altar, Devon reached out and took my hand, his palm warm. "You look incredible," he whispered, eyes shining. For a split second, my throat tightened with something like grief, not just for what we were about to lose, but for the version of him I had wanted to believe in. The officiant smiled at us, opened his folder, and began to speak. Words about love, commitment, trust. They floated through the air, almost surreal. When he asked if anyone had any reason these two should not be joined, the room remained silent, as always. Ceremonies assume that if a truth exists, someone will be brave enough to speak it in that one sanctioned pause. Most of the time, no one is. This time, I chose differently. Before we continue, I said, my voice cutting through the hall clearly, there's something I need to say. The officiant stopped, startled. Devon's head snapped toward me. A hush fell over the room, heavy and immediate. I could feel his fingers tighten around mine. Renee, he murmured under his breath, what are you doing? I gently slipped my hand from his, feeling the tremor in his grip as it fell away. I turned to face the guests, my veil brushing my shoulders. I promise this won't take long, I said, my voice steady. But it will be honest. I opened my purse and pulled out the envelope, the paper crisp against my fingertips. In the front row, Denise shifted in her seat, a puzzled frown knitting her brows. Simone's posture changed. She straightened slightly, her smile dimming. Over the last few months, I continued, I've been told to be the calm one, to avoid drama, to keep my head high while other people tested my boundaries. I glanced briefly at Simone, then back to the crowd. I was asked to ignore the past while it kept walking into my present in white dresses and bouquets. A ripple of nervous laughter and murmurs moved through the room. Devon stepped slightly closer to me, his voice tense. Renee, this isn't the time, he hissed. I turned my head and looked him in the eyes. It's exactly the time, I said quietly. Then I slid the pages out of the envelope and unfolded them. The sound of paper echoed louder than it had any right to. These, I announced, lifting the printouts, are text messages between my fiancé and his ex, Simone Harris. A collective gasp rose, sharp and uncontrolled. Simone lurched halfway to her feet, then froze as every eye in the room turned to her. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply started to read. I miss us, I read aloud, my voice clear. You know nobody understands you the way I do. I flipped to the next page. She looks like a filler between chapters, Devon. You'll come back when you're done playing house. The words hung in the air like smoke. Someone in the middle row whispered, Lord have mercy. Devon reached for the papers. Renee, stop, he said, panic edging his tone now. I stepped slightly away, out of his reach. No, I replied. I have been quiet enough. I kept going, my voice unwavering. Jordan would lose his mind if he knew I still talk to you. I read. He thinks I'm over you. But you and I both know real things don't just end. A sharp intake of breath came from the back of the room where Jordan stood. Heads turned in his direction like a wave. Simone finally found her voice. Renee, that's private, she shouted, her composure cracking. You have no right. I cut her off without raising my volume. I had every right to know, I said. You stood in white at my rehearsal, Simone. You brought yourself into my story. Now you can stand in the truth. I held up the last page, then turned my attention toward the back. Jordan, I called, meeting his eyes. You deserve to see this too. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped down the aisle. The room parted in front of him, people shrinking back in their seats. When he reached us, I handed him a second set of copies I'd prepared, folded neatly. His hand closed around them, the muscles in his jaw jumping as he looked at Simone, who had gone pale beneath her makeup. "Jordan, please," she stammered, her voice thin. "It's not what it looks like." He stared at her, then at the pages in his hand, then back at her again. "It looks like exactly what it is," he said quietly, each word landing with the weight of a stone. Devon's mother stood up, her voice trembling. "Renee, we could have handled this privately," she said. "You didn't have to embarrass everyone." I turned to her, the years of her subtle digs and comparisons crystallizing in a single moment. "With all due respect, Denise," I replied, "you weren't embarrassed when Simone showed up to my rehearsal in a white dress and bouquet, acting like the bride. You hugged her. You posed for pictures. You let me stand there and swallow that humiliation alone. Today, I'm just returning what I was given, except I'm adding the truth." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the room erupted. Whispers, gasps, someone saying, "I knew something was off." Another person hissing, "I didn't." The officiant stepped back, clearly realizing this ceremony had veered far outside anything in his handbook. Aunt Lorraine remained seated, her expression unreadable, but her eyes met mine, and in them I saw not judgment, but a quiet respect. Tasha, standing to the side with the bridesmaids, looked at me with tears shining in her eyes, her chin lifted like she wanted to clap and was barely restraining herself. Devon finally found his words. "Renee, listen," he said, reaching out again. "Yes, she messaged me. Yes, I should have shut it down harder, and I'm sorry. But this?" He gestured to the room, the papers, the frozen faces. "This is too far. You're blowing everything up." I looked at him, taking in the man I had almost vowed my life to. "You were okay with her blowing up my rehearsal," I answered softly. "You were okay with her blowing up my piece. The only difference today is that you're not the only one who gets to stay comfortable." Simone's hands shook as she tried to step forward, eyes darting between me, Devon, and Jordan. "You're really going to let her do this?" she demanded of Devon, anger finally spilling over. "After everything we've been through? After everything you told me?" Jordan let out a low, humorless laugh. "Oh, he's told you things?" he said. "Good. Now you both get to tell the truth without the safety of private messages." Simone's breath hitched. "Jordan, please," she whispered. "We were just talking. It didn't mean anything." He stared at her like she was a stranger. "Then why did you hide it?" he asked. She had no answer. I felt the weight of 100 eyes on me and suddenly realized how light my chest felt. Not happy. Not triumphant in the cartoon sense, but free in a way I hadn't expected. I turned back to the officiant, who looked like he wished the floor would open up beneath him. "I think we're done here," I said gently. "There won't be a wedding today." A shocked murmur rippled through the hall. Devon stared at me, stunned. "Renee," he began, "we can fix." I shook my head. "No," I interrupted. "I've spent too long fixing things I didn't break. I'm not starting a marriage by cleaning up a mess you refuse to see." I stepped away from the altar, my dress dragging slightly as I moved down the steps. For a moment, it felt like walking through water, everything slow, sound muffled, faces a blur. As I passed the front row, Aunt Lorraine reached out and brushed my wrist with her fingers, a small, grounding touch. "You did what you had to do," she murmured. The words wrapped around me like a shawl. Behind me, I heard Simone begin to sob in earnest, the bouquet finally slipping from her grip and rolling down the aisle like a fallen prop. Devin called my name, but I didn't stop. Not this time. By the time I reached the back of the hall, the whispers had grown into a steady roar. Questions, theories, shocked exclamations. Jordan stepped aside to let me pass, but as I drew level with him, he spoke quietly without looking at me. "Thank you," he said, "for the truth, even if it hurts." I nodded once. "We both deserved better than their half versions," I replied. Our eyes met for a brief, clear moment, two strangers bound by the same wreckage. Then we moved in opposite directions. Outside, the air was cooler, sharper. I stepped out into it, drawing a deep breath, the sounds of the chaos behind me fading as the doors swung slowly shut. For the first time in a long time, there was no script to follow, no performance to maintain. Just the echo of my own heartbeat and the quiet knowledge that I had chosen myself in the one room where everyone expected me to choose silence. The moment the doors closed behind me, the noise from the hall became a dull, distant roar, like a storm I had finally stepped out of. I stood there on the concrete just outside the venue, wedding dress spilling around my feet, veil lifting gently in the breeze, and let the silence rush in. For a few seconds, I didn't move. My heart was racing, my hands still tingling from holding those pages. But underneath the adrenaline, there was a strange, heavy stillness. The life I had been walking toward for months had just shattered in front of everyone I knew, and yet the only thing I felt was relief, deep and startling. I realized I had been holding my breath for a very long time, long before the rehearsal, long before Simone's white dress. Maybe for years. Tasha burst through the doors a moment later, her heels clacking against the ground as she hurried toward me. "Renee," she called, hitching up her dress so she wouldn't trip. When she reached me, she grabbed my shoulders, scanning my face. "Hey, are you okay?" The question was too big to answer honestly, so I let out a shaky laugh instead. "Define okay," I said. I just canceled my wedding in front of 3 generations of his family and an ex in a ball gown. Tasha's lips twitched, torn between outrage and admiration. "You also read them like a scripture," she replied. "I've never seen anything like that in my life." Her voice softened. "You did what you had to do." I swallowed hard, the words landing somewhere tender. "It shouldn't have had to be like that," I murmured. But I couldn't live with myself if I'd walked back down that aisle for him. We stood there for a few moments, the two of us in our dresses, listening to muffled voices rising and falling inside. People were already choosing sides, spinning their versions. I could almost hear the narratives forming, that I was dramatic, vindictive, unforgiving. But I also knew there would be others telling a different story, that I was patient until patience became self-betrayal, that I stayed quiet until quiet turned into complicity. Tasha slipped her arm through mine. "I've got the car," she said. "You're not going back in there. They can mail you whatever's left." As we walked toward the parking lot, I glanced back just once at the double doors. Somewhere behind them, Devin was trying to explain the inexplicable. Simone was collecting the pieces of her shattered image, and his family was realizing they had clapped for a performance that finally turned on them. The first night was the hardest, not because I doubted what I'd done, but because the silence around me was finally empty instead of crowded with other people's expectations. Back at my apartment, still half in my gown, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my phone as it lit up again and again. Calls from Devin, messages from his mother, a flurry of texts from numbers I didn't recognize, cousins maybe, or friends of friends. "We should talk. You didn't have to do her like that. Are you okay? Please call him." Every vibration felt like someone tapping on a door I'd just locked for my own protection. I turned the phone face down and let it buzz against the nightstand until the battery died. For once, my silence wasn't a concession. It was a decision. As the hours stretched into early morning, memories surfaced like film reels, all the times I had chosen quiet over confrontation. I saw myself at 23 in a meeting where my boss cut me off and used my idea as if it were his own, and how I had smiled afterward when he said, "We make a good team." I saw myself at 30 listening to a boyfriend minimize my feelings, telling me I was too sensitive when I objected to his flirting in front of me. And more recently, I saw Denise's faintly amused glance when she compared my dessert to Simone's, Devin's shrug when I asked about his ex, the white dress at the rehearsal, the bouquet, the phone buzzing on the nightstand. In each scene, I watched myself swallow the urge to speak. I told myself I was choosing peace. In reality, I'd been dulling the edges of my own voice until it barely registered, even to me. The days that followed were a cascade of fallout. When I finally turned my phone back on, the screen flooded with notifications. Some messages were simple and kind. "Proud of you for choosing yourself," one colleague wrote. "That was brutal, but necessary," said another. Others were less generous. "You embarrassed him," read a text from one of Devin's cousins. "You could have walked away quietly." Quietly. The word lodged in my ribs like a splinter. I thought back to every time I'd been urged to handle things quietly so other people wouldn't have to face what they'd done. Quiet had been my prison, and now that I'd escaped it, people were upset that the door was swinging loudly on its hinges. Devin's messages arrived in clusters, paragraphs spilling onto the screen. "I'm sorry," he wrote. "You blindsided me, but I know I hurt you. I should have cut her off. I thought it would fade on its own. Can we please talk somewhere just us? No drama, no audience, just us." There was a time when just us would have sounded like safety. Now it felt like a request to go back into the dark. I typed and erased several replies before finally settling on the only truth that still had room in my chest. I deserve someone who protects my peace when no one is watching, I sent. You had months to choose me when it was quiet. I chose myself when it was loud. There's nothing left to discuss." His response came quickly: anger, bargaining, hurt, but it no longer pierced in the same way. Whatever held me to him had snapped at the altar. News of what happened spread faster than I could have imagined. Someone had recorded part of the scene on their phone. My voice reading Simone's messages, the bouquet falling, Jordan walking down the aisle. The video made its way through group chats and social media, stripped of context and remixed with commentary. I didn't share it, but it found me anyway in forwarded links and hushed references. Strangers online debated whether I was a hero or a villain. "She's a queen. I would have done worse," one comment read. "She ruined her own wedding just to make a point," said another. I learned something unexpected watching those clips. People will always have opinions about a woman who refuses to play the role of quiet casualty. The difference now was that their opinions no longer dictated my script. Through the noise, a few voices became anchors. Tasha checked in daily, bringing coffee, making me laugh, refusing to let me drown in what-ifs. "You didn't burn your life down," she said one afternoon as we sat on my couch surrounded by unopened boxes of returned gifts. "You burned down a stage built on lies. There's a difference." At work, my friend Daniel left a post-it on my monitor that read, "Proud of you for not marrying the red flag factory." And then there was Aunt Lorraine. A week after the non-wedding, she called from an unknown number. "Hi, baby," she said when I answered. "It's Lorraine. I asked Tasha for your contact. I hope that's all right." My heart squeezed. "It is," I replied, genuinely surprised. I didn't expect to hear from anyone on his side. She exhaled softly. "I'm not calling on his behalf," she said. "I'm calling on mine." There was a pause. Then, "What you did shook this family. People are arguing, pointing fingers, trying to decide who to blame. But some of us are finally talking about the things we watched and ignored. About how Simone was allowed to saunter in and out of his life like that. About how Denise coddled it. About how often we told women to be the bigger person when we should have been telling the men to grow up. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, tears stinging my eyes. "I didn't want to blow anyone's life up," I said quietly. "I just couldn't keep carrying the cost of everyone else's comfort." Lorraine's voice grew gentle. "I know, and I'm sorry we made you feel like you had to." She hesitated before adding, "For what it's worth, some of us are proud of you. Proud you didn't walk down that aisle pretending you didn't know what you knew. That would have been a slower kind of death." The words landed like a blessing. "Thank you," I whispered. I keep thinking about all the times I stayed quiet before this, at work, in other relationships, even with Devin's family. Like I thought if I kept swallowing, eventually people would see I was worth protecting. Lorraine hummed, a low sound of understanding. "Baby, silence kept you safe when you were younger," she said. "When speaking up would have cost you too much. But somewhere along the way, the world convinced you that same silence was your only option. What you did at that altar, that was you noticing the cost had changed." In the months that followed, the consequences unfolded layer by layer. Simone lost more than the white dress and the performance. Jordan left her, quietly at first, then decisively. I heard through Lorraine that he'd moved out within a week, taking his things in one trip and leaving her in an apartment full of mirrors she now had to face alone. Devon's family gatherings weren't the same either. Lorraine reported that Denise, who had once been so quick with comparisons and veiled jabs, now found herself under scrutiny. People are remembering all the little ways she fed that mess, Lorraine said. It's funny how loud those memories get once someone turns the light on. Devon, for his part, tried to rebuild his image as a man who had simply made a mistake, but without me there to stand beside him and prove his worth, the cracks in his maturity began to show. For a while, I wrestled with guilt. Not about stopping the wedding, that remained the clearest decision I'd ever made, but about how public it had been. Did I really have to do it then, there, in front of everyone? Late at night, that question circled my mind like a moth around a lamp. Each time, I came back to the same answer. My humiliation had been public long before my response was. Simone walked into my rehearsal in white in front of dozens of people. The texts calling me filler existed while I was being paraded as forever. The family knew enough to be uneasy and chose to laugh it off. If I had walked away quietly afterward, they would have called me dramatic anyway, just off stage, where my pain could be dismissed as rumor. At least this way, the truth was undeniable. I began to understand that my silence had never been free. It had always charged interest, taken little pieces of me in exchange for temporary peace. Every time I bit my tongue, I paid a price in self-respect. Every time I let someone cross a line without consequence, I taught them my boundaries were negotiable. The altar had been my line in the sand, not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally realized the debt had come due. Breaking my silence there was costly, yes. It ended an engagement, shattered a family's illusion of itself, made me the subject of whispered stories. But the alternative would have been more expensive, a lifetime waking up next to a man who didn't choose me when it wasn't convenient. Slowly, the world around me reshaped itself. I returned my dress to its garment bag and pushed it to the back of the closet, not as a symbol of failure, but as a reminder that I'd chosen myself when it counted. I went back to work, and when a colleague tried to talk over me in a meeting, I interrupted him calmly and said I wasn't finished, without apology. The room blinked in surprise, then adjusted. With friends, I stopped laughing off comments that stung. That wasn't funny, I'd say. Don't do that again. There were awkward moments, small confrontations, growing pains as people got used to the new version of me, the one who still valued peace, but not at the cost of erasing herself. My relationship with silence changed too. It stopped being the reflexive response to discomfort and became a deliberate choice. There were calls I didn't return, messages I left unanswered, not out of fear, but because I owed no one further explanation. Denise sent a long, rambling voicemail once, alternating between justification and regret. "You embarrassed me," she said at one point. But maybe I deserved some of it. I listened once, then deleted it. There was no conversation that would rewrite the past or restore trust. My silence toward her was no longer submission. It was a boundary. On the other hand, there were moments when I embraced quiet as something sacred instead of suffocating. I took walks without music, letting my thoughts move at their own pace instead of chasing distractions. I went to therapy and sat in rooms where my feelings didn't have to be justified, where my voice filled the space without interruption. My therapist asked me once, "When was the first time you learned that staying quiet kept you safe?" And I realized I could trace it all the way back to childhood dinners, unstable adults, and the rule that children were seen and not heard. "And when did you realize that rule had expired?" she asked gently. I thought of Simone in white, of my own voice at the altar, clear and steady. "At my almost wedding," I answered. "That's the day I outgrew it." Months later, I found myself sitting at a cafe near the old venue, not by design, but by coincidence. I was meeting a client for work, but arrived early and ended up with a view of the building where my life had pivoted. People were going in for another event, some celebration, some carefully planned joy. I watched them for a moment, then looked down at my hands wrapped around a warm mug. There was a time when seeing that place would have made my chest tighten with shame. Now, it just looked like a building. The real transformation had happened inside me, not inside those walls. As I sat there, my phone buzzed with a new message from Tasha, a picture of her engagement ring, her smile wide and genuine. "He asked," the caption read. And yes, I said yes. But trust me, I checked that man twice. I laughed aloud and typed back, "I'm happy for you. You deserve someone who doesn't flinch when you speak." I meant it. Watching her build something new didn't make me bitter. It made me hopeful. I wasn't afraid of love. I was just done loving in places where my silence was a requirement. That night, back home, I stood by my window looking out at the city lights, feeling a deep, quiet steadiness in my chest. The story people would tell about me would vary depending on who was speaking. Some would say I ruined my own wedding. Others would say I saved my own life. I couldn't control their narratives. What I could control was the one I told myself. In my version, I was not the woman who got left at the altar or the woman who detonated her big day for attention. I was the woman who finally decided her voice mattered more than other people's comfort. Now, when I choose silence, it's on my terms. It's the stillness after a boundary has been set, the calm after saying, "No, that doesn't work for me," and meaning it. It's the peace of not explaining my worth to anyone who should have recognized it from the beginning. My quiet is no longer the space where I disappear. It's the ground I stand on. And as for that white dress, the bouquet, the aisle I never finished walking, they're no longer symbols of failure in my mind. They're markers on a road I stepped off of just in time. I didn't get the wedding I once imagined, but I got something better. Myself, intact, unedited, and finally heard.